and I'll begin by welcoming everybody. And um, I'm David Hill, President of the Shebig Island Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our continuation of the Winter Lecture Series. And I'm going to let Valerie King in as I multitask here. Later this year, we hope to be back to meeting in person, but in the meantime, we appreciate the opportunity to be able to reach out and to people who might not otherwise be able to attend these meetings. So this is really a good thing. I mean, we've got 37 people here in early February, and that's a pretty good turnout. So our speaker tonight needs no introduction. It's Donna Damon. With that, I will turn it over to Donna to tell us a little bit more about Shebig and probably fill us in with things that we never even knew before. Donna, go ahead.
Thank you, David. For some reason, we can't figure out why. You're not going to be able to see me tonight, but you'll be able to see the slides, and hopefully you can hear me. And so I guess I don't get to tell my joke about my COVID hairdo, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I was just going to tell you all that I haven't had a haircut for a while, so that's why I look the way I do. But God interceded and blocked my face off, so all is good. All right, so Shebig Island, the place we call home. And what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the early history of the island. And tonight, I'm going to focus a little bit on agriculture and also some other topics that you may be more familiar with. And if you want to know more about Shebig agriculture in the 19th century, from 1840 to 1880, you can go on to the Shebig Historical Society website, which is shebighistory.com, and you can find all of the archived sloops logs. And I did a whole series back in the early, well, it was around probably 2011 or 12, up through, that was a companion piece to Toby Webb's analysis of the census. And I analyzed the agricultural census. So at first
Donna, before you get going, did you say there's a reason we cannot see, we can see Nancy? Hi, Nancy. David, is that Nancy?
We don't know why you can't see. We don't know, Gabby, why you can't see me. We can't figure that out. But you can see the slides, and that's the important thing.
Okay. Thank you.
So anyway, so that's kind of the overview. And Glenn, let's just get going. This is I'll have to give credit to this screen. Rachel took this from an airplane, looking at Shebig. And if you really like this, you can come to the museum at some point and buy a magnet of that. So we're always selling something, even in the middle of our talks here. Okay, now I got to figure out how to move this forward. There we go. All right, so the beginning of Shebig's recorded history, of course, comes with the Native Americans. And this is one of the first documents that we have that, that describe transferring property from the Native Americans to the Europeans. And you'll notice down below the pictographs. And one of the things I used to point out to my students was that it's not just the Native Americans who have a pictograph, but you also see the wife of Thomas Stevens. She just has an M, so she apparently can't write her name. And so it's kind of interesting that we all have different ways to identify ourselves. And we know that Native Americans were here at least probably 1,000 years ago, and maybe more than that. It's the one area of Shebig history that we really haven't done much work with. I've been hoping that at some point USM would do a dig here and do some in-depth studies, but it hasn't come up on their agenda yet. But Shebig has more
Donna, Donna, you're going to have to unmute.
Okay.
There, sorry about that.
When did I stop talking?
Uh, Hard to tell what the last thing was.
All right, well, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. All right, so the evidence that we have that the Native Americans were here is people have found arrowheads. This one was found, the one on the left was found at Hamilton Beach. And then if you look at the other slide, it looks like ice with something etched in. It's actually the bottom of a pipe that was found in the road, in the middle of the road when they were doing work on it in the 1930s in front of the Gwillim House. On that hill that you're coming down, they found a burial mound that they did not know was a burial mound. And on the bottom of the pipe is this pictograph. And Nathan Hamilton, supposedly no relation to any of us, but he's the archaeologist for Casco Bay, and he looked at it and he said he had never seen that pictograph anywhere except from something that he saw it once from something that came from Cape Cod. And the material that that pipe is made from came from Ohio. So it shows that the Native Americans had a network of moving around and communicating throughout the country, even though they were here in Maine. So people always say, how did we get the East End and the West End? Well, we got the East End and West End came from a division of the island many, many years ago, back in the late 16, early 1700s. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about it as being the Chandler line, the Chandlers and the Waits, because those were the people who basically divided up, began to divide up the island and create lots and boundary lines that we still use today. This boundary line that we see here, this boundary line here runs from Division Point all the way to Duck Cove, which was the name originally of the creek, so Johnson's Cove. You can pick up pieces of that stone wall throughout the island if you follow it. And then we all know that there are stone walls and cellar holes all over the island. And I'll give some time. I've done that one before, which is kind of interesting, looking at stone walls and thinking about, and cellar holes, about what used to be there. But so this gives you an idea. This was the East End, this was the West End. And so here we have, this is the map. It's from the DeBar's map, and it was hand colored, but they missed one farm. You can see right here, there are two dots for a house and a building, and you can see the line out around it. But when it was hand colored, they missed that. So this is Division Point area. This would have been where the Hamiltons were. There were Waits up here on Hamilton Beach. And these would have been Chandler houses down in here. And you notice the spelling of the island. So this was at the time of the American Revolution. So if you think about it, there were only 5 families here. And Ambrose Hamilton's wife at the time had like 8 or 9, maybe 10 kids. And he was then he went off patrolling the seacoast of Cumberland County. And he left her here. And one of their sons related to another son, and it was written up later in the newspaper, that he described Portland burning during just before the revolution, when Mowat came and burned Portland. So the houses that were here around that time probably would have looked something like the main part of this house. This is a cape. It's a Chandler cape from about the around 1790s. It could be earlier than that, but we've got it at least back to the 1790s. And raise your hand if you know where that house is. David will monitor your. Oh, I see Toby Webb. I can't see many people, but I do see Toby.
Toby's gonna have
So,
to raise his hand.
Toby, do you want to identify?
Toby's gonna have to raise his hand to speak so I can give him permission.
Oh, you have to raise the hand on the Zoom, Toby.
Yeah, down at the bottom. Don't see your hand up yet. Right in the middle, there should be raise hand. Um, hmm. Well, let me see. I guess I can do it this way. Hang on, everybody. A lot of people on. Okay. I've asked Toby to unmute. Ah, okay.
There you go, Toby.
Sorry for the bother, but that's Poochie Ross's house.
Yes, it is Poochie Ross's house. And this addition was put on in the mid 1800s. But if you look at the basic house, you're seeing a typical New England Cape. This is a Strout family who happened to live there at the time this photograph was taken. But originally it was a Chandler house and then a Ross house. And then the Henleys lived there and the Strouts and the Uptons.
And if I could interrupt with a technical note, we don't have hands to raise on this. It's not that kind of a format.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so if you want to speak, just unmute yourself. I think you can unmute yourself. Boy,
I believe that under reactions is where the raise hand is now.
oh, they changed it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that's good to know. Down at the bottom, over on the right-hand side where it says reactions, that's where you can raise your hand and I'll recognize you and put you on the air. Thank you for that, whoever spoke up.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And feel free, anybody, to interrupt me at any time if you have a question. All right, so in 1810, there were 29 families on Shebig. In 1820, there were 35 families. Those families were interconnected. Now I've shown the interconnectedness by these colors. So you see red are Bennetts and Dowdys. And what I like to say is all Dowdys are Bennetts, but not all Bennetts are Dowdys. Because the first Dowdy who came to Shebig's wife was a Bennett. So that's kind of how that works. So you see the blue, there's a lot of connections with those blues. That's because those names, Curran, Hamilton, Hill, Hutchinson, Sawyer, Weber, Mansfield, and Ross all have Hamilton in common. And then we have Thompson and Littlefield, where in their family connections. And then you see the other ones, the outliers, the Chandlers, the Mitchells, the Rickers, and the Henleys. In 1820, they were not connected to any of the other families or to each other. Except, no, I take that back. Some of the Mitchells and the Chandlers were connected. So I'm going to start off with early marine endeavors. What was happening on Shebig in the early 1800s. And 1820, Portland became the state capital. We've just celebrated the bicentennial of Maine, and it really really gave a boost to the Portland waterfront. It had been in some kind of a depression because of the embargo, Jefferson's embargo, and shipping had been, with the War of 1812, there'd been all kinds of disruption in the development of Portland. But once Portland became the capital of Maine, and it was only for a few years, it gave it a shot in the arm. And this drawing down in the right-hand corner is Longfellow when he was 8 years old. And so he described this period of time in his poem, My Lost Youth. And I remember the black wharves and the slips and the sea tides tossing free, and the Spanish sailors with bearded lips, and the beauty and mystery of the ships and the magic of the sea. So he grew up at that time in the Portland waterfront, and he often talked about it. At that time, 4th Street was the last street. Commercial Street wasn't built until they brought the railroad in. So on Shebig, Ebenezer Hill built 5 ships at Division Point and sailed to the West Indies and Europe. And this isn't just one of those tall tales that people, say, oh yeah, that's just a story that your father told you. We actually have documents, thanks to Ken Hamilton and thanks to the Maine Historical Society, that we actually have documentation of his voyages. And this is a bill of sale for selling a piece of one of his ships, the Decatur. But he built 5 there, and the Decatur was built in 1816, right after the War of 1812. Now this is Division Point. He didn't build them on Division Point. He built them in the gully that is off this picture to the left. If you go down the steps at the town right of way to Division Point, and you go over and you're facing the ocean, you go to the right, you can see a big gully. And that's where he had his shipyard. And he employed people from Shebig as crew. And so a lot of the people, some of those people got to go to Europe, and they were in the West Indies and various places. He unfortunately contracted malaria and died in New York City and is buried under a park. They turned the cemetery into a park in the late 1800s. And that's where Ebenezer Hill ended up. But there were also new opportunities for other people to do other things. And Ebenezer Hill wasn't the only person who was, a mariner at that time. I just used him as illustration. We have, in 1830, we have a copy of the Seaman's Papers of John Chandler, as well as some other papers that belong to Edmund Sawyer. These came from the Sawyer papers at Maine Historical Society. And this was a serendipitous discovery by the Granell family. And the Ebenezer Hill's papers were a serendipitous discovery by me. It's sometimes you're looking for something else and you actually find the mother when you're not really looking for it. But this shows that Edmund Sawyer was a coaster. He was delivering freight up and down the coast. The first Sawyer paper is 1832. It's the freight from Bangor to Bangor for a barrel of apples and 5 barrels of cider. I'm sure he had other things there too. But these agents, including Ebenezer Hill, would be given a cargo, and then it was up to them to go and negotiate with the people in the cities wherever they took it. So they would try to sell it and get the best deal they could. And then the last one is talking about shipping lime. And this shipping eventually evolved into what we know as stone slooping, because Edmund Sawyer had a sloop called the Jane. I don't think it was awfully big, but they just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And Shebig was centrally located in Casco Bay, and Portland was a rising port. So at the same time all this is happening, and the maritime side, we often forget what's happening on the land. And this photograph is a picture of a barn that belonged to the David Hamilton house. If you look in the distance, you can see Little John's and Cousins Island. And if you go down the road to Juniper Lodge, it's right down at the end. And this is down where Howard Coffin lives. Now, this is something I just made up myself today, just out of curiosity. In the 1840, if you look at these farms, if you look at these, at the purple on this paper, those all were either the children or grandchildren of Ambrose Hamilton. I mean, that's a huge impact when you look at it visually. So think about where Jane Frizzell lives, and think about past the transfer station on the North Shore, and that's what you're talking about. And then on the South Shore, if you look at the everything from Central Landing down past Ernie Burgess's, as well as the East End Point. So, that just thinking about it from those perspectives, it shows you the impact. And that's why, oftentimes people say, why do you always talk about Hamilton's when you're giving a talk? Well, you can't really avoid it if you're going to talk about the history of Shebig. And so I'm getting it right out there right now so that everybody can understand. At once I gave a talk at the hall years and years ago, and somebody came up to me afterward and she said, I could rent the hall and stand up there and talk about my relatives too. But anyway, that's the story with the Hamiltons. So if you keep hearing about Hamiltons, that's why.
Donna,
Yes.
might I also mention that Deborah Hamilton's a direct descendant of John and Priscilla Alden, so you can go back a little bit further even.
Right, and also George Soule, who came on the Mayflower.
Right.
And so out of those, I'm going to go back to this again. And if you look at this piece of land here, this belonged to 3 brothers. And those 3 brothers each built a house, had a farm, had a barn, and 2 of the houses are still standing. One of them is Charlotte St. Cyr's house, Judy Dowdy's mother's house, and across my house would be over here in these bushes, and that would be Judy's great-grandfather. And the other is Mike McGee's house, and this is Stephen Bennett, who was his wife was actually the descendant of this house. And both of those houses are still owned they've always been owned by the same family. Mike McGee is a direct descendant of the Hamiltons who built this house, and Judy Dowdy is a direct descendant of the Hamiltons who built this house from 1835 up. So that, when you think about it, that's pretty good. The third brother's house was down below the Slow Bell, and it burned in a fire. And so that one does not exist, but it's kind of amazing that these houses are still in the same family. So on the south side, the north side of the island, this is another picture of the David Hamilton farm, looking over a different angle. You saw his barn over here before. He actually had 2 barns here. But this is his house, and this was like a shed, but eventually it was connected to the house. We have numerous pictures of this farmhouse, but this was built in the 1830s as well. And it is the only standing house on the South Shore of any of those original houses that you saw on the of the grandchildren. One of the children's houses, Herb Main's house, is Herb Main's house, and that belonged to Deborah Hutchinson. But along the shore, this is the only one along the shore. And so now I'm going to look at the Wentworth Ricker farm from 1840. And you can probably tell where this is. You can see the umbrella tree. You see the hook down here, little Shebig's over there, it's high tide. There's Susie Stavropoulos' house. What you don't see are trees and bushes. This whole area was farmed for over a century, or more than a century. And so in 1840, it was owned by Joel Ricker Jr., who was the grandson of Wentworth Ricker. And he, who built the house initially. So they tilled 4 acres of land. So if you think about it, so that means that was under actual cultivation, 4 acres of land. They had 1 team of oxen. They had they raised 200 bushels of potatoes. They had 3 cows and produced 150 pounds of butter. They had one swine. Almost everybody had their own swine, and you got about 200 pounds dressed from the swine. And they had 10 sheep, and they had 25 pounds of wool. They probably were just getting into the sheep business, because later on, with various numbers of sheep, we find they're getting a lot more wool, so they were probably young. He had 5 acres of woodland, and the woodland was valued at much higher than the farmland. In some of the years that I analyzed, the woodland might be valued at $19 an acre, and the improved land, like where the gardens were and around the house, was only $4 or $5 an acre. So you can, and you probably can guess why. It's because they had cut down most of the trees, and the trees were at a real premium. But I think this is a great picture to show how clear it is. Look at Little Shebig too, because there was a farm over on Little Shebig, and you can see that's all cleared out. There was also a housing shortage in 1840. There were 39 houses and 59 families. Think about that. So in this house, this is the Thompson house on Littlefield Road. And Nathaniel and Joseph Thompson were brothers. They shared the house, and they had 10 family members. Think about all those people living in that little tiny house. And this house is still owned by descendants of Nathaniel Thompson. And this is one of the few inland farms that didn't have waterfront with it. Most of the, if you think back to that picture that I showed a while ago, most of those farms bordered the water. They were saltwater farms. But these Thompson and Littlefield up in the middle of the island were totally landlocked. The advantage that some of those farms, especially on the inside of the island toward Little John's Head, they could go down and harvest seaweed and mussel mud, which really enhanced their gardens. So now we're up to 1850. There's still no horses. But there's plenty of sheep. They've got a lot more sheep now. In fact, a dozen families produced 380 pounds of wool. So compared to what, 10 sheep with 25 pounds. So they're really into the sheep business. Several Shebiggers, including Sam Ross and John Hamilton, known as Uncle Jack, and James Hamilton Jr., William Littlefield, they bought Stockman and Bangs Island just to graze their sheep. They would take them over there and just let them go for the summer. And that's one reason why those islands were, until the person went to Bangs's and started and planted the trees, those islands were all still denuded because of the sheep grazing. They had 3 farms that said that they had home manufacturing. So I was wondering what that could be. Could it be, and they all had sheep. So I'm just wondering if they were in the yarn business, but I don't know I don't know for sure. And there were 4 orchards listed. 2 were on Carter's Point Road. If you go down, one would be where the Grunkos are, and the other is on the other side of the road where the Maloneys are. The golf course had what is now the golf course, had an orchard, as well as Division Point. And in the 1840s, there was no mention of orchards or apple trees. And as time went on, those orchards began to grow. And 21 farms, there were 21 farms in 1850, and they produced 2,000 bushels of potatoes. So when people talk about New England and meat and potatoes, you can figure it out. Now, this is Sam Ross's house looking over at Stockman, which was the island he bought. This is where Lou and Mary Holman live. It's on that foundation. This house burned. And if you look down here, you can see the home where the Hales have. It was Nedra Baker before that, Lee and Haw before that, right down on the shore. But look at how clear it is all the way around. So here we are in apple orchards. Eventually they flourished all over the island. And if you look at this picture on the right, that's the Gwillem house with the big barn behind it. And you can see, this has been cropped, this picture, but the apple trees went all the way out through. And there's still one in Gertrude Jones's yard. And I think there's one out in the woods somewhere there, which I believe are probably part of these original apples. And then this house here is where Wayne's Pit is. It belonged to his his great grandfather. And it burned, but you can see there's apple trees there too. And so as the island, even though it's the trees are being cut down, people are planting the apple trees. In 1860, I went back and reread those articles I wrote for the Sloops Log, and one of them, the headline was "Cowhides as Good as Money." So cowhide was pretty valuable. Portland had several tanneries in the Back Cove area. And all I can think of is that they would sell these to the Hamilton Company. We know that because that's how I got this information, from their account books. And then I think they were selling them probably to those tanneries in Portland. But veal, they got 5 cents a pound for veal. And the hide, they got 14 cents a pound. So the hide was much more valuable than the meat. The beef was 4 cents, the cowhide was 6 cents. And at this time in 1860, there were 20 yoke of oxen on Shebig, so that means there were 40. The highest number we have is 27 yoke. And that was around the time when they brought houses from Cliff Island over to Shebig in over the ice. But you can see they used them for various things. Here we have John Alvin Hamilton and David Hamilton, and they're down on the clam flats getting seaweed for their garden with the oxen. And here we have John Alvin Hamilton again. These are the same oxen, and they're haying. And here we have them again. You can see this is John Alvin, and they're working on the road with the oxen. So 1860 brought big changes. By then we had 3 stores on Shebig, 3 churches, and 2 schools. There were 3 town roads, the North Road, South Road, and Mansfield Road. Now, this is another question. Does anyone know where Mansfield Road is? You can look, David, and see if you see anybody. See anyone? Oh, Toby's got his hand up. Can you unmute him, David? You're muted, David. I think we have technical difficulties.
Okay.
Oh, they go.
Yeah,
It's David Hill unmuted. Now see if Toby can.
You can hear me now, but I still can't find Toby. Hold on a second. There's Toby. Okay.
He can unmute himself.
Yep. He should be able to.
There you go.
Mansfield Road, Lover's Lane.
Yes. Mansfield Road was Lover's Lane. The schoolhouse was right on the corner, opposite the entrance to Lover's Lane. And so they built a town road that actually, or they dedicated one that followed basically Lover's Lane, went up behind Kathmandu. You can still follow it, and came out down by where Deb Hall lives. And that was to connect the people who were living down in that Sunset area and all the Rickers who were living at Ricker's Head and Weber's. And so they had a way to get to school. And my father told me when he was a kid that Lida Ricker, who lived in one of the Ballard houses up there, that her father was one of the caretakers, that she used to come to school through that path, what is now a path. but it was set up as actually a town road. So theoretically, even though it has by disuse been abandoned, the public never loses their rights to traverse something. They just can't traverse it in automobiles. So in 1870, the neighborhoods were starting to evolve. And then in the 1870 census, we found, and I found an identity crisis. There were 19 people in the census who said they were farmers, but there were 43 farmers who 43 schedules of agriculture. So the census person didn't necessarily agree with how they were self-identifying. There were many, many more people as sailors and mariners. And we all know that the sailors and mariners also had farms. And so they were choosing what they wanted to be called. And so this map is from, it was actually developed during the Civil War by the Coastal Geodetic Survey. And it was published, this particular one that we have in our collection here is 1870. But it was, they worked on it a few years before that. And you can see that there are property lines on here. There, you can see the roads that were traveled at the time, and not just the town roads, but you can see how people got from one farm to another. This is a great map. And again, I'm going to give you an advertisement. If you want to buy one of these, we actually sell these at the museum. And it's kind of interesting. But what I find is really interesting is you can see how the island, how agriculture impacted the island. And you can see where the trees, there were still trees, and then you see all this open space. And this would be a great planning tool if people really appreciate how you can learn from history, because all of this area here on the North Shore was basically in cultivation because the land was so rich. And so it's really important when you look at it to think about, okay, which lands do you want to keep open and which ones do you want to develop in houses? One of the things that's also interesting is you can see the drainage paths. Here's this whole drainage area that goes down through into the creeks or Johnson's Cove. And over in the middle of the island, you see all these trees, and you see this land. There's a lot of land right here. Now, all these other places along the shore basically have been developed, they're in cultivation, but this one isn't. And the reason is because it was one of the three brothers, the one that lived where Mike McGee lives, and he died in his early 40s, and his widow was left there. And so she kept the property, but she was not able to keep it as a farm. And so you can really learn a lot from this. And then just for the fun of it, I went through and I showed the developing neighborhoods. So you can see what the neighborhoods looked like in 1870. So this would be the East End. And all these little blocks are either houses or barns, but they're definitely buildings. And so here's the wharf down here. You see the Holmbaum Kendall York house here in their barn. And you see how people got there. So here's a shortcut that goes through what's now the golf course to get there. And then this probably follows pretty close to the road that we follow today. And here, this is the center, what we think of as what we call the center. And this would be where Central Landing is right here. And going over through, this is where Julie is. The house that was Charlotte McKee's in a barn. That barn actually was in my yard. Again, you can see the trees and see this wetland here that goes down to Springett's Pond. So you see that whole watershed. Okay, now internet connection is unstable, so if you lose me, that might happen. All right, now we're at Coleman's Cove. We're at the west end. And you can see there's a lot of swampy area around there as well. But you see that over in here, there are quite a few houses that have been built up here. And these were basically dowdy houses. And then you look over here and at Bennett's Cove, and there's no, oh, sorry. There's another whole little enclave, and those were basically Bennett's. And going on, you see the original house where the Jenkses were, the Higgins farm. And this is the middle of the island. This would be up around Grasshopper Hill. So if you think about it, this is the South Road. You go up, the Commons is right here. In fact, this is the building that is the Commons, was there. And then you take that sharp turn and go up through here, and you see a lot of these Littlefield and Thompson houses. But you pick this up, and you're on that dividing line for the island. And here's the Rick ahead to Sunset area. And so there's several of the Rickers and Webbers who are in this area. And then over in this area, you have, there were some Sawyers who lived over here, Hamiltons. And then Wentworth Ricker, of course, lived here. But again, you can see, here's the schoolhouse. And this would be the South Road. And here's Lover's Lane going up through and going up and then going over across. So you get a good idea. So these are like the Ballard's Woods, have been woods for a long time. All right, so 1880, a man named Edward Elwell wrote a book called Portland and Vicinity. And in it, he describes the different islands. And how he describes Shebig is a large island with a considerable population with churches and schools, never much visited as a summer resort. And he's comparing it to what's happening on Long Island and on Peaks Island. And so here are the three stores, although they probably had a different building. This is where Susie Stavropoulos lives. It was the Mansfield house at the time, and they had a store that was probably in the L that's not on the picture. And then there's the Hamilton Company store. This photograph's a little bit later than 1880 because the end of the wharf, this part of the wharf wasn't even built till 1886, and the freight shed the coal shed wasn't added till 1892. But this part would have been looking the way it did. And that was purported to have had one of the biggest inventories of various items of any store north of Boston, any general store. And we have their account books. And they sold everything from dynamite to sewing needles to kids' boots to school books to grapefruit, you name it, they sold it. And then at what is now Central in 1880, you would have had this store that the Littlefields ran. And again, this picture's in the early 1900s, but you get the idea. You can see down there where the store was located. And then this is the house that was there, the Solomon Hamilton house, where Gil Martin's house is now. Many people remember it as Dr. Pedersen's house. So those were three stores. So basically what he was doing is describing Shebig more as a regular community, not just a place where tourists were coming. So these are the Littlefield and Rose farms. Sorry. And so if you look at in the picture on the right with the oxen, you see there's the oxen again, and there's a mowing machine, and they're mowing those fields. But look at how you can see that this has been under cultivation for a long, long time. There's a stone wall here that separates the Littlefields from the Roses, that you can still find that by the boatyard. And then if you look carefully over here, there's the Rose barn and there's the Rose house. And there's the fish house down on the shore. And this is the pond that's down there. And on this picture that shows, again, you can see how clear everything was.
Oh, I thought you were coming back
This whole
today.
area was totally cleared out and under cultivation. Again, you can see, get a little bit better view of the stone wall. And there's, again, the rose.
Sorry, Donna, there you go.
That's okay. I unmuted myself. And then the house is here. If you've ever been down there, you can find the cellar hole. That house burned. There's a white lilac bush. And this is this is one of the Rose's house. It used to be called the Kelly House. It's out on at the end of, if you go down the Rose Point Road, you would run literally into it. And but you notice that, you know, we still have horses. There were a lot of horses around in the late early 1900s on Shebig. Okay, so I don't know why I put that picture in there twice, but, oh, I know why I did it. I did it on purpose, actually. So this is looking out, and this would be the house. This is with the Phipps house. And you see the house, and this was connected to a big, gigantic barn. The barn was taken down, and Roy Hill built it as a cottage, which the Howards now have. It's called the Barn House. This is the Rothschild cottage. You look in this cottage road. This is the Massachusetts colony. This is the only cottage you see in this photograph. You can see the road that goes down to Camp Providence. And this is Camp Providence. That was here too. And then this would be Peggy Jones's house, the Cole McCann house now. And there's their barn. And this is called the Owl's Nest, where the Doe Bush, that was another barn that was converted into a house. So you can see how clear that is. None of those houses have that water view because their taxes would be much higher than they are now. And then this is looking up into Parker's Woods, Littlefield Woods. And this was a big 3-story house that was up there. And so it's just giving you looking from both directions. Now, the question is, where is this? And I'm sure you all know where this is, but this is an example of a farmer who was also a stone sloop captain. This was Aaron Cleave's house. Before that, it was his brother-in-law, Stephen Carrott's, but Aaron Cleaves really developed it into a farm. He owned all the land from one side of the island to the other. It's now known as the Camlosi Farm, but this is what it looked like in its heyday. This is from North Road. This is the view from North Road. You see the clamshell walkway and the beautiful roses. My mother said this was the showplace of Shebig. See and if you look carefully, you can see there was a horse as a windmill. I mean, a weather vane. And then this is the view from the South Road. You're looking at the back of the house, and there's Jane Frizzell's house here. And Jane Frizzell's grandfather was born in this house. So this was one of her family houses. But this is great because this picture here of the back, you can see all the different outbuildings they had and the gardens. And so here was a person who had a stone sloop. He had his own little stone wharf, we all call Aaron's Wharf, down in front, but he still had a farm at the same time. So farms and cottages, the transition begins in the 1880s. So that's one of the areas, when you think about it, when we looked at William Littlefield's, you had William Littlefield's house and the Rothschild house in Camp Providence. Here you have the John Hamilton house, and look at the fish houses down on Hamilton Beach. And then you have the house that the Miskills own now. right here. So you start to see that transition. Again, you've seen this picture before because it shows the apple trees. I'm going to quickly go through just because some people don't have any background about stone slooping, but this isn't really a stone slooping thing, but talk. But at the same time, all this agriculture was going on, we had 30 boats up and down, going up and down the coast at various times, building. They were marine contractors. And these are just some of the things they built. They built the Halfway Rock in 1870. They built Fort Gorges, began before the Civil War and finished it after. A boat from Shebig actually laid the cornerstone there. Ram Island Ledge Light. The M.M. Hamilton carried all of these granite blocks. And this man here, you can't see him very closely, but that's Ray Hamilton's grandfather, who was the superintendent on that job. And in the 1880s, they built the Rockland Breakwater, and the government would only allocate $100,000 a year. And so it took 10 years to build the Rockland Breakwater. But it was a huge marine construction job. And of course, they built the stone wharf. This is the sloop active. This picture was found in an album on the dump by Alice Bowman, and she gave it to me. So many treasures were thrown away on the dump. And luckily people like Alice, Mabel Hill, and others would see somebody who bought an island house and cleaned it out and would go and pick up the treasures and keep them. But this is a fabulous picture. And they were also divers. You don't think about these people who were building breakwaters and things as being divers, but they were. Here's a picture of somebody getting ready to go down. You can see there's this is a diving platform. He's got the whole outfit on. Here they are, it's the same diving platform. And one person in particular, actually, how we really found out about these is in people's obituaries. When they died, they would talk about them being divers. And Isaac Hamilton, in his obituary, it said that he was personally responsible for removing almost every rock from the Kennebec River. And that's where Bath Iron Works brings those big ships down through there. And what he would do is dive down, put the chains around them, they'd lift them, and then they could go and sell them someplace, somebody who needed fill. And so it was a lucrative business. They were getting paid twice for the same rock, one to get it out of the river and then one to get rid of it. And then this is the Plymouth Rock Dredge. And we could use that right now, actually. They're the ones who created the first channel at the Stone Wharf. So if they hadn't created that channel, we would not be going from the Stone Wharf right now. But this is in Camden. And the Plymouth Rock was all up and down the New England coast. This is Robert Hamilton Jr., who had the house on the East End many of us know as Waldo's. And it now belongs to the Duttons. And that was his home. And he was one of the co-owners of this dredge. And with stone slooping came prosperity and society. And in 1872, this house was built on Shebig, and it was the most valuable house in the town of Cumberland. It burned with the hotel. It's approximately where the Leonard's house is now. But this was a beautiful house. There's one very similar to it over in Harpswell if you're driving over there. And this is a picture of the family who lived there. And he was the captain of the sloop Yankee Girl. And his sons also became stone sloop captains. And during the Rockland Breakwater construction, they actually moved down to Rockland. And his daughter married somebody from Vinyl Haven. This daughter married somebody from Vinyl Haven. Hamilton and Company was a store you saw early on, was originally named Ross and Hamilton. And then when Sam Ross retired, a couple of other Hamiltons bought in. And so it became Hamilton and Company. And they really were the ones who really expanded it and built it into, and had in 1886, had the addition built on the wharf, and the freight shed and coal shed was later built because they sold coal. They also bought clams. If you went to our maritime exhibit, the great one that Toby and Cap worked on, there was a whole section that talked about Hamilton and Company and the importance of that business to the island community. They served almost as the bank when you read their account books. If somebody, for example, was building a house, the owner of the house would go in and pay them on the account book. So there would be a credit of $25, for example, that would come off their bill at the store. They also gave mortgages, and they also invested in the different stone sloops and fishing vessels. So this is a question, and we had this answer in our exhibit. And so some people probably already read it. Was it a wharf or a pier? Because some people call it a stone wharf and some call it stone pier. And there's all these definitions, and people argue about what the definition is and what it really is. The bottom line is it's made out of stone. So everybody agrees with that part of it. Originally, it was called Hamilton's Landing. So that, that would, if we went back to that, we wouldn't be fighting over whether it was a pier or a wharf. But the Hamiltons themselves, in their own account book that Ann Holmbaum has, they actually called it Hamilton's Wharf. So the Hamiltons thought they were building a wharf. So if you call it Stone Pier, that's fine, and you can justify that. But the Hamiltons themselves thought they weren't building a landing, and they weren't building a pier, they were building a wharf. So that's trivia. Now, just a quick, I'm just going to quickly go through some fishing. Any of these topics could end up being a whole lecture, but this is kind of like an overview. So here we have, this is down around Central Landing in the about 1893, and you can look at all the different, here are the different lobster traps. They're drying their nets. They call this double ender, it wasn't a dory, they called it a picayune. And that's what the stone sloops, or a wherry, I'm sorry, this was a wherry. And that's what the stone sloops used. And you can see the barrels, they probably were tarring their ropes because that's what they had to do in those days. And when the upland owner, the person who built Cap and Jane's house, bought the land, the first thing he did was kick out the fishermen. So they moved further down. They took their fish houses and moved further down. And you may wonder why I have these two guys here. Because these people were fishermen. And when fishermen went to town, they dressed up. There's a lot of stereotypes. And we have stereotypes about all different kinds of cultures in this country. And one of them is about fishermen. But when fishermen went to town, they knew how to dress up. And this is Sid Doughty and Henry Dyer. And it's interesting because they're both great grandfathers of Amanda Campbell's, which is kind of it's kind of fun. But when we had when we did the West End exhibit, we covered all aspects of life on the West End. And the person who had lived here his whole life came in and said, where did they get those? Where'd you get all these pictures? And I said, well, people opened up their albums. He said, where'd they get the cameras? I said, they had cameras on the West End. And we had wonderful photographs. And he said, where did they get those really nice clothes? All the girls were in these little white, the people in the East End didn't even go to the West End. They did not even know what was going on. And they had a stereotype. And you look at the school pictures and you can't tell the difference between the kids who lived on the East End and the kids who lived on the West End. So it's one of those cultural things that I try to educate people along the way about. Clamming was always an important part of the Shebig economy, from the salt bait that they sold to Ross and Hamilton and Company for the fishing schooners, to Fenderson's Clam Factory that was down at the end of my road. That some people might wonder, why is it called Fenderson Road? Well, it's called Fenderson Road because Willard Fenderson came there from Scarborough and built a factory, and Casco Bay, Harpswell Steamboat Company at the time, built a big wharf off there. And so he had his own steamboat landing. And this is Fenderson right here. And we did an analysis of the numbers of clams that were dug in 1886 for the last exhibit. And you probably remember seeing Henry Orr in Hamilton. And he dug 67 barrels of shelled out clams in 1886 over a 4-month period. And now it's hard to go get a mess to make a clam chowder. So fish houses were everywhere. All around the island were fish houses. These are down at Coleman's Cove. These were up at the back shore on the East End facing Little John's. This is down at Springett's, down below Ernie Burgess's. Again, this is facing out to sea. And the last working fish house on Shebig is Poochie Ross's, and there's Poochie down by his fish house. That's the problem with vernacular architecture, like barns and when they're not used anymore, chicken coops, that kind of thing. They just they just disappear. Sword fishing was a big deal. They went way offshore to get swordfish, and that and hand lining on the Grand Banks and dory fishing. Shebig has a really long history of that. Ray Hamilton used to say that the real fishermen lived on the West End, that the ones in the East End, they only went in the bay fishing. And he said it was it's the West Enders who really were the fishermen. Sardining was another important fishery that started back in the late 1800s and went right up until the 1970s, actually. These are pictures painting my Uncle Bill's stories in the 1950s down at the cove that Beth and Doug Ross owned. And this is Ed Dowdy with a dory with a seine. And this is Jim Ross, who was Poochie Ross's father, and he's on the Reliance, and they're actually, you can see the different dories that are stacked up, but they all did different kinds of fishing at different kinds of time. Okay, so all right, so there's another picture of him. This is setting and hauling. So here, this is Sanford's boat, and this was setting a seine in Chandler's Cove. You see the dory out there. And here they are actually getting ready to haul it in over in this picture. That's Sanford, actually, and Jim Rich. And they also, several of the people here had airplanes because they used them for spotting, because if you go up in the air, you can see the schools of fish. So they would tell them where to go. That's the first airplane I ever went in, that I ever got a ride in. And so this shows taking out fish in the old days. They would use a dip net to take it out and put it into the carrier. And they used the dories, so it was, real manual labor. And then the carriers became more mechanized. Here's a bunch down here at Chandler's Cove. Because sometimes they would have so many fish, it would take multiple carriers in order to carry the fish. And now there are no sardines coming in at all. They were broken up by the Russian, and this isn't like some joke or anything, but seriously, when the Russian factory ships were out here, they broke up the schools of fish that used to come into the bay. And this is the Trident, and that was one of the carriers. And this is just to show you, this was Eben Doughty, Sanford's brother, was the captain of the Trident. And you can see how full they would get these fish, how many fish they put on it. By then, he had like a section. They put it like a vacuum cleaner thing. When I was a kid, we used to go watch them do it, and he'd give us some to take home to cook, the herring. But you'd take and stick it down in like a vacuum cleaner, and it would just suck them up, and they'd fill up every inch of space that they could. And you can see how low in the water this boat is. But Eben has another claim to fame. He figured out a market for the scales, because herring is a really scaly fish. And they would sell them to cosmetic companies, and they used them in the production of cosmetics. And then the bottom fell out of that. They found something else to do with it. But for a while, they were actually making money out of every part of the fish. And the guts would go for fish meal, and so it was quite lucrative. And going back to, I'm going to go back to sardining. I was reading a newspaper clipping the other day that one boy on Shebig, when he was, I think, 17, made $5,000 in 1 week. Doug Dyer, down to the West End, because they had so many herring that they caught back in the early 50s. And a lot of people who invested their money lived off the money that they made from sardining during that time, because it was amazing. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of bushels of these things. So lobstering, has evolved certainly over time here. And here you see the person just, pushing his dory off, hauling by hand. This is Dick called his father Walter, rowing back in. And he's got he's got a sail on his dory that he's fishing with. And you can see, actually, this is down below my house, and you can see the pilings of the wharf from the clam factory there. And if you look on the chart, it still says piles, because they're still sticking up under the water. And then, of course, this is Bennett's today. And there were other fishing that was going on. People were fishing for mackerel, the smelts. There were people who were sea moss and seaweed was a business. You can see they had a big operation down at Rose's Point. And then there was the trawling, which was huge here, the small boat trawl fishermen in the early 1900s up until the 1950s. And it really started the draggers really broke up the schools, and it was much more difficult. But you can see he's baiting up a trawl. And I thought the fishing part was great to end with Sanford, and this is a halibut that he caught. That is a good sized fish. So tourism, what about tourism? Well, that's another story. We're going to talk about that another time. But you can look at this area in the East End where it's starting to build up, that we know that was all a big farm. We're looking at the Massachusetts Colony, we know was a farm. And here we are, this is right across from the hotel. And those of you who might not know or have memories might think that this was Leonard's store and the post office reversed. But no, that's not the case. They built buildings that were the same kind of vernacular building at the East End. One of them turned into the Sochek's Red House, and the other one is where the policeman stays across from Beverly's. They were moved. But this is a great photograph. This is taken from the cupola, I think, of the house. It was where the Leonard's house is now. And that's it. If anybody has any questions, I can stop sharing my screen and I can see, okay. Stop sharing.
Yeah, if anybody has
And-
any questions, please unmute yourself down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And
David, this is Alan.
there you go.
I want to let you know I had her for a teacher in junior high. That's why. Brings back
That's right,
memories
Alan
of-
was in my first junior high class. Wow, this is like old home week. I see all my friends and I see all my family.
Donna,
Wow.
Donna, you might be interested. I'm experimenting with overlaying the soil data from the state on the old
Yeah.
property lines. Might give a little insight into why some places were more fruitful than others.
Yeah, because they have better soil.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's a great idea. Anyone have any questions?
Is this a monthly
Oh.
thing you're doing, Donna?
Pardon me?
Is this a monthly?
Yes, we do
Jack?
this. Next month, it's Earl Shuttleworth talking about the burning of Portland, the big fire in Portland in 1866.
Okay. Sounds like a good program too.
Donna,
So feel free to break in because we can't see everybody at once. Jackie?
yes, I wanted to say that I was struck, that picture of Sid Doughty and Henry Dyer that you showed.
Yes.
I was struck by the resemblance. I could see Skipper Joe in Henry Dyer.
Yeah, it's interesting to see family resemblances for sure.
Donna, it's Gretchen. I just
hi,
have
Gretchen.
to, I have to say, seeing some of these maps, even on a relatively small screen that we have on a laptop, it's really wonderful the way you were able to get them onto your slides because it was very easy to see what you were talking about. And I thank you for kind of rummaging around in our archives to find all this.
Well, and as I said, that map of 1870 of Shebig, we're all sold out right now, but we plan to reorder.
Yep.
It's very distinctive to our mission.
Donna, I just wanted to say great job.
Oh, thanks, Vicki. I'm so glad you could get on.
My first time live. I've watched all of the repeats, but I've not been on live. So you did a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Anybody have any specific questions? If you're interested really about the farming, check those Sloop's Logs articles out. I reread them over the last couple of days, and I was actually impressed with how readable they actually are. So I forgot all about what I wrote. It's funny when you go back and read your own writing, years later. But there's a lot of information about what people were actually raising here. And one thing I didn't talk about today in farming, which I should have, is the connection to Hannaford brothers. After the Civil War, two members of the Hannaford family moved to Shebig and bought farms. One was down around the Sunset area, and the other, well, it went all the way from Sunset all the way almost to the schoolhouse. And the other one was up behind the cemetery in that area. And one of their relatives eventually moved to Clabberd Island, and they then started Hannaford Brothers by sending, what they would do is race their vegetables on Clabberd and then take them into Portland. And that was the genesis of that. But the Hannafords who were there, and the Bishops and Mansfields, and many of the people who lived in that whole area shipped off a lot of produce and sold it and sent it to New York City because there was such a cry for it because of all the immigrants coming into the United States.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending tonight in the virtual world. As I say, I think this is something we're going to continue even when we can actually meet face to face. And And I'd like to just thank everybody for coming and tune in next time.
Yes. Thank you all for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Wonderful.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good
Hi,
job,
Pat and
Donna.
Phil. Hi, Pam. Hi, Valerie. I'm looking at all these different people I haven't seen for a long time.
Hi, Beverly.
And then Beverly, I'm expecting to
Hi,
see you,
Andy.
Beverly.
Hi.
Hi,
Bye.
Masha.
Comments.
Good night, John Boy.
All right. All right.
Good night,
Bye.
Elizabeth.
All right.
You.
Hey,
You're
Phil.
welcome. Hi,
Bye-bye.
Polly.